I'm Emily Galvin Almanza, and I am so excited to be joining our guest, Representative Rashida Tlaib, today from Michigan's 13th District to talk about the HEROES Act. So first, a little background. Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced the HEROES Act, a $3 trillion package in response to the coronavirus pandemic. This would be the next stimulus bill or relief bill proposed by the House. And there are good things in the bill. We know that it includes nearly $1 trillion for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments, and some protections for essential workers. But from what we know right now, it seems like the bill falls far short of what progressives inside and outside Congress say is necessary to meet the scale of the crisis. So it excludes key policies that are necessary to protect workers and small businesses, such as paycheck guarantees, recurring direct payments, and restrictions on mergers and acquisitions. It also has some deeply problematic provisions that have been flagged by activists and journalists, including bailouts for corporate lobbyists and debt collectors. So because of all of this, the bill has set the stage for a fight this week between Speaker Pelosi and progressives in Congress. Progressive Caucus chairs Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan are currently advising their members to say they are undecided on the bill. Now, when I say the bill, this bill is physically massive. It's one of the biggest bills ever considered by Congress. It is 1,800 pages. The summary version is nearly 100 pages, and it's even being changed right now as we speak. We've gotten words that there are amendments being proposed to the bill right now. So Representatives Jayapal and Pocan have requested more time for their members to read and engage with the material and review the bill in its entirety. But as far as we know, Speaker Pelosi is pushing forward to hold a vote on the bill tomorrow. Now, we're here to discuss with Representative Tlaib what's good in the bill, what's bad in the bill, and the fight that lies ahead in Congress. So to do that, so happy to be joined by someone who is much closer to this than we are and will know a lot more. She represents some of the poorest and hardest hit districts in the country, including Detroit. So despite overwhelming support, including among Republican voters for key policies in her Automatic Boost to Communities Act, like recurring payments and an emergency first responder corps, these aren't in the bill. Now, Representative Tlaib, first of all, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
What can you tell us about the political dynamics in the House right now? And do you think that Speaker Pelosi is going to hold to her timeline of holding the vote tomorrow?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to move tomorrow. And I think for a lot of listeners to know, a lot of this work was done at various committee levels. We just didn't know what the final decision was on whatever we had various hearings on House Oversight and also Financial Services that I sit on around reoccurring payments, the conversation around some reforms that needed to be done to hold those accountable that did receive money in the $4 trillion prior. That one was larger, just remember that. In that proposal, it was a lot of corporate bailout and not a lot of oversight and accountability. And so, for many of us in the House, especially us progressives, we were hoping to see some more bold, much more direct aid to people versus having to go through various processes to getting it, and I understand people's various different views, but I represent the third poorest congressional district. We're the frontline communities that really didn't need right now aid. We needed it 2 months ago, direct help for so many of my residents that had to file for unemployment. Some will not have a job to go back to. We saw already in my county, over 3,500 people died, majority being African Americans. One of 4 people in my district, in the city of Detroit where I live, are essential workers, where, months ago they were demanding essential pay and essential healthcare coverage. And now, poof, they're essential, but all of those coverages and post protection, including paid sick leave, is not part of that. And so, for many of us progressives that are very connected to a lot of these local grassroots groups that have been talking about some of these issues and how it's been impacting the most vulnerable, we do feel like very much it falls short. And again, regarding recurring payments and paycheck guarantee.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about those elements. So some of these elements are included in your Emergency Water is a Human Right Act and the Emergency Relief for State and Territorial and Local Governments Act. And some of what the policy in those acts is included in the HEROES Act. But
Yeah.
your bill, the Automatic Booster Communities Act, didn't make it into the package. And can you talk a little bit about what's being prioritized here, and also what the consequences are of passing a bill that does not include recurring payments?
Yeah. And I want to thank, many of my Progressive Caucus members were really key in getting water as a human right. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and I were pushing forward and saying, look, thousands of people don't have water. And you're, alone here in Michigan, but imagine 15 million people are impacted by water shutoff, while their governors, their health experts are saying, hey, wash your hands 10 times a day, but they don't have access to water. So we were able to get $1.5 billion designated in there for Water as a Human Right Fund. And that has really been, again, it will be transformative, hopefully, as it gets implemented here in Michigan and all around the country. But, one of the things regarding even state relief and state local relief, again, many of our residents are living check by check, right? They're in survivor mode prior to this pandemic. And now with this pandemic, they are really harmed by this, and the anxiety and fear and seeing their neighbors dying and seeing so many of their coworkers getting sick, is that many of my local communities, they're the ones that when you call, they're the ones who show up, not the president, not members of Congress. It's our local governments that are so important and too critical to fail right now. And so we wanted to make sure that there was aid there for them, and that's there. And again, they've been in survivor mode. But how is that going to touch people today, like right now at this moment? It has to be in combination. You can't just help the local governments and not help the people that live in it. And people don't understand what I mean is that when you give people a $2,000 a month and you're saying it's going to happen, it's going to be consistent, there's certainty that you're going to get it. When you say that to folks, they understand, because 40% of folks across this country, somebody in that household lost a job. A third of our neighbors could not pay their rent in April. I don't even know what the numbers are in Michigan. And when you see 33 million people apply for unemployment, when you see people, on the phone saying, can I get a forbearance on my mortgage? I mean, I think it's at 25%. So many of our folks, again, are suffering. And all this moratorium, all this aid, that is temporary. When it's done, they're going to have these bills are going to be still due. And that's why the $2,000 is critically important. And it goes to people right away, right now, directly. They don't have to go through a community-based organization. God bless them. But that's not why can't we just make sure that they have the aid right away and that we get, again, to the most vulnerable? People still to this day have not even got their 1,200 stimulus because they're underbanked, unbanked. They're, again, that's why the first responders core was so critically important, why the debit card approach was so critically important. And again, one of the things I want to push back is when people say, well, you have these kinds of programs and it will touch them, not as effectively as when you give direct payments. And
that's something I wanted to ask you about, the man on the street, right? You're talking about what ordinary people are experiencing every day, and like how they can get access to things without injecting more bureaucracy and complexity and like the punishment of process into the equation. So for people who are listening to you and are saying like, yes, I agree, I want this. A lot of our polling has shown, polling I've seen from has shown bipartisan support for really, really straightforward policies. What can people do right now, tonight, in this moment, to try and get more of that into this bill?
They have to talk about a people's bailout, direct payment to people. There's a human dignity approach to this. It allows them to decide what they need. Is it childcare that they need? Is it to go pick up their prescription at that point because they're unemployed? Is it to maybe pay their rent for April? Whatever it is, they shouldn't have to go through this other level of government to be able to get access to this aid. They all should be able to get again help as quickly and as fast as possible. Other countries are doing it, and I don't like to always use them as an example, but my God, if other countries see the value of helping students that are now unemployed, right? That may not have gotten aid last time. They're still going to probably be left out at the 1,200 and they're not going to be able to get access. This is students. This is our immigrant neighbors. These are our, small business communities tells me it's great. We knew when the 1,200 came down because people started ordering carry out. They started supporting their local establishment. There's something about that kind of understanding and partnership that stimulates the local economy. When you bail out corporations, they hoard it. They keep it to themselves. They give it to shareholders. They don't care. People could be dying tomorrow. They don't care. But when you give it to people, They spend it for themselves, for their families. Some even spend it in their communities. I know for a fact that people took some of their $1,200 that they got last time and gave it to a nonprofit to do grocery drop off. I know one actually donated it to a local organization to do masks, to actually make masks. All of the to say is that there is such a tremendous value, and economists will agree, and not only beyond the polling, economists will agree when you give money directly to people, it protects everyone and it saves
The money's
lives.
for, right, is to put it into the economy, is to put it into shops and businesses and groceries and gas stations. But let's talk about where some of that CARES Act money went. The CARES Act included a $500 billion handout to corporations. And I know that you were vocal about how ridiculous it was at the time that Mitch McConnell and President Trump prioritized corporations over giving direct help to humans. So what can be done now to make sure that the new coronavirus legislation doesn't keep prioritizing corporations over people?
Now, the House version is not as aggressive as you may have seen in the past, because the Senate, they started with that. They started with bailing out the banks, the airlines. I mean, you name it, they were all in the corporate welfare line. And there was no sense of oversight, where you hear so much bureaucracy when it comes to giving money to people. But, what you might see the pushback for many of us will be around oversight of whatever has been actually distributed. And there hasn't been a huge ask of, let's prevent mergers. Let's make sure that whatever we were able to provide aid for actually resulted in people continuing to work. We saw an airline that got bailed out and they turned around the next day and laid off people. I mean, what was the point of the government bailout if you were going to just hurt our residents? That was their money that you took, the residents' money, the workers. That's all of our money. People need to understand that. And it's going to some of the most wealthiest companies across this nation. I mean, you saw billionaires actually become more wealthier during this pandemic. How is that possible? But for the fact that we did not center the aid aggressively enough around people. And that's what I think needs to happen, is the connection of understanding we're not investing enough in human beings and people more than anything else right now. And again, I am confident that when we do that, it does actually stop the spread of COVID and saves lives.
It seems reasonable to assume that giving people the means they need to wash their hands and get food and be safe and clean their house would make us all safer, since we're all in this together and we share vulnerability. So, but putting that reason aside, even if we ended up with the bill that was your perfect bill in the House, Mitch McConnell has essentially said that the Pelosi bill has no chance in the Senate, and even a perfect bill would have no chance, probably even less chance in the Senate. So what do you think is the pathway forward to actually passing another round of coronavirus relief?
Look, the people have so much power. I don't think they realize, look, he's a millionaire. He's worth like $27 million. McConnell is. He's so disconnected with the pain of what's happening on the ground. I mean, you can see in some of the actions around people that support his move, and kind of, him bowing down to whatever the Trump administration says needs to be priority. You can't prioritize people over the economy. It just doesn't make any sense. And even the experts are telling you it doesn't make any sense. So what you can do is you outwork them, you out-organize, and you get out there and you tell, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you think, you label is that you have the power to shift this by demanding that they put people first. And no matter what McConnell continues to say, people feel this sense like, oh, we don't have any power. Yes, you do, because guess what? There's other members of the United States Senate that you can call and demand that their leader, McConnell, moves a bill that is centered around people first. We're going to fight like hell. I mean, we're not going to back down. I mean, one of the things that, to be very clear for folks, is many of my progressive members, we literally get on the phone. We call our nurses. We call the clinics, the local clinics that are doing testing. We check in with, a number of grassroots Black clubs, organizations that have been working on issues like this. And we say, what is happening? And they're saying, we ran out of masks today. We were now able to do more than 200 tests today because we ran out of swabs. Right now, more than ever, we're hearing from, Children's Hospital here in Detroit that you have to be careful because now children can get it. And so what can we do to prevent that kind of spread? And what can we do to learn more about that? And everybody, though, consistently will always come down to what are residents, what are people getting from the federal government? How do we make government about people? And that's why I'm asking people to not allow McConnell, who really is working for just the few, and he's not working for this country. And he comes from one state where there's, there's more of us out there in other communities and other states that have two senators that we can have go in there and champion and fight back against his, really anti-family, anti-children, anti-sick, agenda that he continues to move forward.
It does seem like an agenda that is directly contravening what people, even in his jurisdiction, desperately need right now.
He has one of the poorest districts, Emily.
Right.
He represents one of the poorest poorest countries. State, I'm sorry, in the country. Kentucky is suffering, and he represents, again, like some of the coal miners, those that are living in, really severe poverty. And you would think that he would support direct payments, that you would think that he would support, making sure that the state of Kentucky has the resources they need and all these things. Unfortunately, I heard that their state actually gets a lot of more resources than those that are actually more populated, because he's earmarking or somehow getting more funds to that state. But it's not actually reaching some of the people on the ground, because poverty is actually continues to increase in his state, not decrease. And so I tell you all, when you have millionaires that are in charge, they're never going to understand the pain of the oppression that is happening to our neighbors. And it's only it's our job to make sure that they're listening and to push back against that kind of, not my problem, let them go bankrupt, let them die approach.
So let's break down the other side of that and some of the motivations there. This question goes beyond McConnell. It goes to any opponent of really basic help, like recurring payments or a merger ban or paycheck guarantee. What do opponents have to gain from pushing these anti-family policies?
Look, it's the corporate greed. Understand this, it's broken. Corporations have tainted our governmental process. There's only 60 members of Congress that don't take corporate PAC money. That alone will speak volumes of why you don't feel like you're connected to Congress, or they don't understand what's going on with you. It's because people have paid to be able to get ahead of you. People have paid, corporations, not even people. Corporations have paid to get ahead of all of us. And to be able to profit off of our pain, off of our deaths, off of our oppression. And so, that's what's happening, is that we allowed corporations to somehow, and it's the will of the people to get it back and change it, but they are now somehow completely hijacked the system. And we feel it every single day when we see pensions get cut, when we see wages decreasing instead of increasing. We see them continue to be bailed out with no oversight, and shareholders becoming more wealthier than, suffering like everybody else is right now during this global pandemic. So you can't read their minds, but you can follow the money. And when you follow the money, you realize that somebody was able to pay off folks to not make you a priority.
Well, let's talk about what happens next. A lot of people have been talking about the degree to which a crisis of this level, a pandemic of this level, a global, almost unifying moment of peril is a mechanism through which we can build a better world. And I think that's a spot of hope for a lot of folks out there who are hoping that something good will come of all of this suffering and crisis. So many of the policies we've been talking about are policies where polls have shown bipartisan support. These are quote unquote progressive policies. Policies that were thought of as really, really progressive last year are now policies that have gained bipartisan support in recent polls. And I'm talking about proposals like your recurring payments, like rent suspension and forgiveness programs, a merger ban, paycheck guarantees, all the stuff we're talking about now, the basic help to humans. And these are not in the bill. These are not necessarily moving forward, but I'd love to have you tell our listeners a little bit more about how progressive leaders are planning to find a path toward a better world and toward policies like that, towards policies that protect families and communities and economic mobility and the American dream. How do you get there from here?
I always say this, and I really truly believe it. Transformative change is not going to help. It is not going to happen, but for people movement on the ground where you demand it from the outside in. And progressive members like me are so connected with grassroots organizations and coalitions. I mean, this bill didn't come from, someone it came from us talking to nonprofit, grassroots policy think tanks, folks that have been talking about this prior to even the pandemic of what we need to be doing to really try to elevate people out of poverty. These are not crises that just came. I mean, we've had a broken healthcare system prior to this pandemic, and now it's showing its ugly face even more. We had a poverty crisis. We had a homelessness crisis. We had so many of these crises that were, broken system that are in place. And many of us progressives are coming in saying, working with labor, working with, community-based organizations, housing folks that are really out there getting movement around at the local level on the ground. I mean, if you think about maybe 5 years ago and you thought, oh, can the House Democrats pass $15 minimum wage? People would laugh at you. Oh, that's too progressive. No, there's no way it's going to pass. We were able to pass $15 minimum wage. Yeah, it took us 7 years. And it took us striking, and it took us organizing, and it took us really pushing back against McDonald's and all these other corporate interests that didn't want this to happen. But we continue to push forward. Yeah, it didn't get through the Senate, but we're going to continue pushing forward because, like I said, no one thought that at the national stage we'd be talking about Medicare for all as we are now. We wouldn't, even the polling there is showing such huge broad support now for it. It only happens because we're demanding it and we're pushing back against misleading, the gaslighting. I mean, we're dealing with people that don't even believe in the science. We're dealing with people that don't even believe like people are living without water. It shows you, the disconnect is real. And when we get more people with lived experiences, not only like myself, but so many others elected in there to speak truth to power, that's when people will finally start budging. I mean, we did not get a lot of these issues in there from the help for the local governments. And we even got a reimbursement rate from FEMA up to 100% for local communities. Right now it's 75%. They can't afford it. All of that happened because, we kept pushing and working with these grassroots organizations saying it needs to happen. These big, bold ideas are not going anywhere. This pandemic is not going anywhere. All of that to say is, if this is not the time for us to really come together and fight back against corporate interests, and that includes some members of Congress that have been bought and paid for, I don't know when.
That's an exciting and hopeful note to close on. That listening to the people closest to the problem and then electing those people to office.
Absolutely.
Representative Tlaib, thank you so much for joining us, for talking with us about this bill. I know